engrams, one of the well-established Magic Online end bosses, for those of you keeping track, and we are about to go down into the action. Both players at 2-0 looking to continue their winning streak. Let's see who can get it done here in round number 3. Opening
This hand from
here
David,
for
a bit
David.
awkward.
Looks like he's working with Drown in the Lock, Into the Story, Thieves Guild Enforcer, and Heartless Act. So a little bit of mill, a little bit of interaction.
Yeah, the primary issue with this hand for David is all the lands come into play tapped, so he doesn't quite have that smooth curve that he's looking for. But with this draw, he's still able to go Thieves Guild Enforcer on 2, and then hold up one of the 2 mana cards on 3 and get things rolling from there. With Thieves Guild Enforcer, any additional rogues will give him the mill he needs to try to turn on that Drown in the Loch, try to turn on that Into the Story, and if he's able to resolve the powerful draw spell, his game plan will just be completely online.
Having a look over at Chris B's hand, Auron's Epiphany, his favourite card, Lovestruck Beast, and the Great Henge. So a little bit of a slower start, apart from that Lovestruck Beast, the one early threat for Chris.
Yeah, Lovestruck Beast is great, but slower start is exactly the problem with this hand. As we look at this hand from David, you can't really reliably be counting on resolving the Great Henge against a deck like Rogues, assuming they're doing their game plan. If they have Heartless Act for that early Lovestruck Beast, suddenly there's no creature on Chris's side to reduce the cost of this Great Henge, and by the time Goldspan Dragon comes down, there's a good chance Drown in the Loch will be available to counter it. So Chris may end up getting stranded with a few uncastable cards in hand for the upcoming turns.
Goldspan Dragon, such a beating when it does hit the battlefield, but we do see that David Inglis has both a Drown in the Loch and a Heartless Act. Kazandu Mammoth the draw for Chris.
Kazandu Mammoth is good. It gives Chris a follow-up to the Lovestruck Beast, or if he'd rather go with it first, he can do that as well. Both of them curve nicely into the Great Henge, so assuming David doesn't have a removal spell, either of these creatures will enable Chris to have that turn 4 Great Henge. Unfortunately, David has the removal spell, and now with the draw of Ruin Crab, he also has the ability to turn all of those cards that require cards in Chris's graveyard online in his hand. Both copies of Into the Story, as well as Drown in the Loch now.
This Ruin Crab hitting the battlefield is not going to be what Chris wants to see, especially with that Fabled Passage to follow it up. That's going to represent 6 cards milled into the graveyard for Chris Botelho.
Yeah, with the 2 that were already milled by the Thieves Guild Enforcer, that immediately puts Chris at the unfortunately magic number of 8 cards in the graveyard, which is what is required to turn on the Thieves Guild Enforcer, enable a more or less fully powered Drown in the Loch, still slightly off from countering the Great Henge at that point, but Into the Story will also be online at that point. So for David, his deck is now completely online.
The Rogue's Nest doing what it does best, getting down these very annoying 1-mana threats. And David Inglis just thinking about whether to follow up with the Heartless Act right now.
Yeah, there's an interesting decision point here for David. Normally, you don't want to let the opponent untap with a creature, as the cost reduction on the Great Henge is huge. However, in this exact scenario, because Kazandu Mammoth has a triggered ability to get to the point where the Great Henge is castable, David has the luxury, if he wanted to pass and wait for Chris to present that land drop and then respond with the removal spell with the trigger on the stack, rather than doing it preemptively. Either way is fine, but should Chris have not had the land there, that would have given David more options going into that turn.
Chris finds the crucial 5th land drop. That's going to be able to let him cast the Goldspan Dragon next turn, but for now it's going to be a fetch off the Fabled Passage, and just the Lovestruck Beast out of the Adventure Zone there for Chris.
Unfortunately for David, no answer in hand to this Lovestruck Beast right now. He does have all the draw spells that he could possibly ask for, But unless he uses this Drown Lock as removal for this Lovestruck Beast, which would allow Goldspan Dragon to resolve, the trade-off is now the Great Henge would be able to come down for Chris the next turn. I think because of this, David may just need to pass with Drown the Lock up and try to do something on Chris's turn, because he should now have enough cards in Chris's graveyard to counter the Great Henge using Drown the Lock.
So if you're Chris, yeah, are you prioritizing getting this Great Henge down, or is it Dragon time?
I think in the long run, the Great Henge will be more important for Chris, so he may want to test the waters with the Goldspan Dragon. Should it resolve, that would also give him the ability to either foretell Auron's Epiphany or cast the Edgewall Innkeeper, depending on what he would want to do there. So I think, given the nature of this matchup, the Great Henge may be more important, but it is also more risky, as in a turn, if David has a draw spell here into double removal spell, for example, the Great Henge may just not be castable anymore.
And it is Dragon time indeed. Chris Fellow, Goldspan Dragon on the deck. And David Inglis immediately going to be answering that with Drown in the Lock, the dragon falling into the cold, murky waters of a Scottish lake.
Yeah, definitely don't want that dragon to resolve. You want to counter it rather than remove it, just to make sure that you don't accidentally give Chris an extra treasure to work with, as that can be huge. As huge as this Heartless Act that will now get rid of this Lovestruck Beast, and this is exactly the issue that Chris risks by going for that dragon over the Great Henge last turn.
When you're the rogues player, Marnie, and I played this deck a little bit, when that first into the story resolves, you just feel so good. It just feels like the world, everything is right in the world. You know, this Great Henge, sure, it can come down. I just drew 4 cards.
Yeah, it's one of those feelings that does fade pretty quickly, considering now, once you're no longer playing this one-for-one game, every creature from Chris Botelho is now cycling, and this was a potentially avoidable situation from David. He could have removed this Lovestruck Beast before passing the turn back, but now that the Great Henge is down, there is no real answer to a resolved Great Henge from this Rogues deck, certainly not in the main deck. So for the rest of the game, David is resigned to the fact that every creature from Chris will draw a card upon entering the battlefield, and that may end up working out to David's favor in the long run if he can get the game to that point. He may be able to set up a win condition of milling Chris, but at the moment, we're not quite there yet. So maybe this card advantage will be what Chris needs to turn this game around, using cards like that Auron's Epiphany to mount pressure.
And we see that Chris actually holding back with the Lovestruck Beast, not wanting to offer the trade with that Thieves Guild Enforcer.
Yeah, understanding that there is the Lurrus sitting in David's hand, so making that trade would just allow David to play Lurrus, replay the Thieves Guild Enforcer from the graveyard, and suddenly Chris has lost his entire aggressive force and has nothing to show for it, essentially. So I think good restraint from Chris, and highlighting why this is a bit of a tough position right now for the Temur deck and needs to start drawing some cards with that Great Henge.
Second copy of Into the Story finds David Inglis 2 copies of Drown in the Lock, a land, and Merfolk Windrobber. Little bit of protection there with Drown in the Lock from anything that Chris Botelho is going to be up to, and I'm looking specifically at that copy of Auron's Epiphany in hand.
Yeah, that was a pretty fantastic Into the Story from David, having 2 more hard counter spells at this point, more or less, given the size of Chris's graveyard, as well as acting as removal spells in case the board gets out of hand, means that for Chris, it's a bit of a tough position. That Lovestruck Beast is a decent draw. It allows him to get another draw if he would like here, 2 with that Edgewall Innkeeper, but again, David should now be feeling safe from this position, understanding that even if something slips through the cracks here from Chris, he's got the tools to answer it.
A plethora of options left in hand for David as well. Lures of the Dream Den, Agadeem's Awakening to bring everything back, Soaring Thought Thief as well to provide even more of an air force. Things looking very good now in this game number 1 for Tangram's David Inglis.
Yeah, this is a bit of a bait attack here from Chris now. He does have that copy of Spikefield Hazard in hand. His goal is to use that on the Thieves Guild Enforcer should it block either of these creatures and try to get it exiled because that is the creature that is holding back this Lovestruck Beast from attacking. He does have the additional copy of Lovestruck Beast in the hand, so he can make another 1/1, meaning he's not worried about being short there. But if he can exile the Thieves Guild Enforcer, at least on a surface level, he's safe from it being recurred by Luris.
And David Inglis not taking the bait there, saying, what is this 0-3 for, if not to jump in front of this pesky little princess token?
Yeah, he's totally fine allowing this 0-3 to die to a stomp, which is what would happen if he blocks the 1/1 with it. That you can just recur with Luris. But once you see Chris attacking a 1/1 into your 4/2 creature, David immediately knows something is up. Players have access to deck lists. He can go into Chris's list and see that copy of Spikefield Hazard available and knows exactly what Chris is up to. And at that point, there's no chance that he's risking this Enforcer by offering it as a block.
Second Lovestruck Beast comes down without making the token first, just gonna become a 6/6 thanks to the Great Henge, cycling into that Crag Crown pathway. So Chris still has this Spikefield Hazard up, but now has to face an onslaught of resources on the other side of the battlefield.
Yeah, things continue getting awkward for Chris. Now there's no creatures in hand for this Great Henge. He does have access to additional 1/1s in the Auron's Epiphany should it resolve, but that is a big ask against this Rogue's deck. And now, if David just removes the current 1/1 token in play, that would mean until Chris is able to produce another 1/1, these Lovestruck Beasts are not actually viable attackers. So for David, just continuing to play this game extremely safe, not attacking with too much, not allowing himself to get into a position where he can potentially get punished.
So is David on the mill plan or the kill plan right now?
At the moment, he's setting up for both, but as we just get a glimpse of Chris's deck, there's only 13 cards left. So certainly with the cards left in David's hand and on board, the mill plan is looking significantly more appealing because it allows him to play defensively while continuing to mill rather than being forced to attack with more creatures.
Merfolk Windrobber finds another Merfolk Windrobber. And yeah, more cards going into the graveyard. Chris Botelho's library looking like a thin little sliver there, mirroring perhaps his hopes of winning this game number 1.
Yeah, that mill puts him down to 8 cards, and at this point, we are approaching the point where even if Chris is able to somehow stabilize the board, he still would not be able to play enough creatures to try to get a lethal attack through. Mystical Dispute may be giving him hope that he could force through this Auron's Epiphany, but unfortunately for Chris, David has 5 mana up. He can use Drown the Loch on Epiphany and still have the mana to pay for Mystical Dispute. So for Chris, anything that may seem like an out is unfortunately just not quite good enough.
Still has to try though. Auron's Epiphany goes on the stack, and as you described, Marnie, here's the Drown in the Loch. The annoying for Chris, 3 mana still available.
A Heartless Act from David at the beginning of Chris's combat step to remove this 1/1 token could shut off all offensive pressure from Chris should David choose to do that. A moment of consideration, but I think even if he doesn't, he's just in such a safe spot here now.
And Chris, with that ticking time bomb of the library count, sort of forced into this position where he has to make this big attack. And Thieves Guild Enforcer, the 5/2, going to be trading with that 6/6 Lovestruck Beast thanks to the Death Touch ability.
Chris going to lead off with a Spikefield Hazard on this Thieves Guild Enforcer, try to make sure that it gets exiled rather than go to the graveyard, at least shut off that avenue of attack for David. David has the option of using Heartless Act on his own creature if he really wants to get it into the graveyard, but that's not the type of play you need to make when you're in this favored position that he is in.
David still had an extremely healthy 18 life as well, 16 after that attack. Chris, with only a few cards left in the library, double Soaring Thought Thief, that represents at least 4 cards of mill.
Yeah, 4 cards from the Thought Thieves, 3 more from one of these Agadim's Awakenings as a land would, I believe, put Chris at 0 cards in the library.
So it looks like all that David has to do now is to just play this Agadim's Awakening, click the backside, and there it is. Ruin Crab, trigger on the stack. That we think is going to empty out Chris's library, and he scoops up game number 1.
Yeah, really well played by David. Just fully measuring himself, understanding what his role in the game is, never getting overly aggressive and leaving a window for Chris to potentially get back in the game. Rather, just making sure that at all points he's the one in control. And again, just a completely measured victory from David.
So if you're Chris and maybe you think in pre-sideboard game number 1 you're not necessarily very favored against rogues, what are you looking to do to change up in your deck?
You want to get more aggressive. You want to be more explosive if you can. We do see those copies of Elder Gargaroth as well as Embercleave. One of the best cards in the matchup, those 2 copies of Clothis, God of Destiny, going to be pretty massive here for Chris, as it is more things he can do before the Rogues deck is online. And once it's on the battlefield, similar to how that Great Henge, it's very difficult to answer from the Rogues deck. If we look at David's deck, there's no answers to a Resolve Clothis. Once it's on the battlefield, it's there for good, and there aren't many counter spells either that can reasonably be ready to counter it on turn 3. So Chris certainly getting a bit more game post board, though it is still going to be a fairly difficult matchup.
And worth noting as well, there is a cost for Chris to bring in these copies of Embercleave. I believe that means he has to uncompanion the Obosh.
Yeah, Obosh, one of the cards that you essentially run in this Temur deck because you can without much cost. A lot of your adventure creatures give you access to a 2-mana play on the off turns where you would normally want 2-mana cards. Stomp and Petty Theft, both 2-mana plays, as well as foretelling cards like Alrund's Epiphany and Sod Coming. So for a deck that is entirely odd mana values, you do still have the ability to have 2-mana plays, but against a deck like Rogues, where you're not that worried about having a finisher, Obosh isn't your avenue to victory. Having that explosiveness of Embercleave is so much more important. We saw how much a Merfolk Windrobber just blocking, sacrificing to draw a card did in that game, and Embercleave makes that line of play not viable.
And there it is, Embercleave in the opening hand there for Chris Botelho. See what David's working with. Drown in the Log into the story, Heartless Act. A little bit of a reactive hand here for David.
Perhaps too reactive. No way to set up mills means that Drownlock and Into the Story aren't viable cards at the moment. So David keeping this hand would purely be hoping the top of his deck delivers what he's looking for. Perhaps the speculation is worth it, but I think in his position, considering the matchup is good for him, he can afford to take a mulligan and hope for something better, something that maybe puts on a little bit more pressure, or at least has cards that can control the board better than this hand is able to.
Really dwelling on this decision here for David. And decides to keep it. So gonna trust the top of his deck to treat him well here. We'll see whether that pans out for him. Second copy of Into the Story, not necessarily what David was looking for here on turn number 1.
Yeah, Chris is able to find what he's looking for with his scry on turn 1, sees a Riverglide pathway on top that he leaves there. That'll turn on all of these adventure creatures to start coming down as creatures as early as next turn. So certainly has access to an offensive force now, should he need it.
Thieves Guild Enforcer a little bit better for David. And Bone Crusher Giant, just the creature side coming down on turn number 3 for Chris. It's time to get aggressive.
Yeah, normally Bone Crusher Giant, the stomp side is excellent against rogues, so you're more than happy to have it. But in Chris's given position, given his hand is a lot of spells and creatures, getting more aggressive with the Bone Crusher Giant and trusting that you have enough value in your other adventure creatures is the right call. You get to start mounting pressure and not let rogues get to that comfortable position where they can just into the story you out.
David immediately dispatching that Bone Crusher Giant with a copy of Heartless Act. No worries, says Chris. I have more.
Yeah, fortunately for David, he is able to go Thieves Guild Enforcer, put two more cards in Chris's graveyard, and then use Drowning Lock to counter this Bone Crusher Giant. You need the 4-3 off the board anyways. You may as well not take 2 damage in the process. And this is exactly the line that David needs to start turning this game potentially in his favor, as he's going to quickly start approaching the point where these Into the Stories may become online. It's not going to take many more rogues. Currently 3, 4 cards in Chris's graveyard. So one more mill of 2 with another Drown in the Lock counter or destroy would be enough to do it.
David Inglis doing a great job here in the early turns of answering every question that Chris Botelho has posed.
For Chris,
And
you
wow, this
really
Thieves
do
Guild
not
Enforcer
want.
was such a big draw for
It,
David.
it, it was massive. It turned on everything that David was doing. It put the exact right number of cards in the graveyard for that tempo play that he needed. And now it's something that can start attacking, not putting on that much pressure yet, but the fear is now in Chris that more could be coming.
No one wants to live in fear.
David thinking
Chris,
about whether he wants to put Luris into his hand here. Uh, Not sure if he needs to leave mana up. Something like a Goldspan Dragon would be scary, but it's also not something he can answer right now. There's only 4 cards in Chris's graveyard, so the only way Drowned Loch would be an answer to Goldspan Dragon, the primary card you're afraid of, is Chris's 5th land is exactly Fabled Passage, and that's not something that David can afford to play around, as it is such a minus tempo play to do that.
Chris Botelho, instead of finding the 5th land, finds a 5-drop. Elder Gargroth, usually a great card against this rogue stack, but not when you can't cast it.
It looks like Chris may be considering a petty theft on the Thieves Guild Enforcer. It would be a bit awkward, as it would essentially allow David to have another way of milling cards and instead just going for the creature side. I think that makes a lot more sense.
Getting that 3-1 flyer down, looking to maybe build up some pressure on David's life total in the air. We, of course, know that David has the Drown and the Lock, as well as this fresh copy of Heartless Act to answer it.
Yeah, now David has reached the point where he's more or less in control, has these removal spells to start trying to get rid of what Chris is presenting. And as soon as he reaches the right number of cards in the graveyard for Into the Story to be online, suddenly everything is feeling great now from David's point of view.
I have to say, things are not looking good for Maria and Riley's prospects in the prediction leagues. Crispy finding the 5th land finally.
Yeah, 5th land is a great start. It does open up options like Embercleave here if he wants it, Elder Gargaroth as well, and the ability to cast an adventure spell as well as a creature at the same time, which is why we see Chris just passing here. Now he has access to another 3-1 flyer, to a stomp. So many options open up because of that 5th land now.
See whether he goes for it here. Decides to just leave open this Stomp and Petty Theft.
Yeah, Lure's not a priority here. There's no cards in the graveyard. So from Chris's point of view, the Lurus is not the must-answer lightning rod that it normally would be. David can untap with it, and should he find a way to put something in the yard, even something like a Merfolk Windrobber that isn't even online right now, you would still get to respond to the trigger by removing this Lurus. So no real risk of just letting David untap and making sure that Chris has all the options available to him.
Now, in this kind of mid-game section of this kind of matchup, Miley, when you're both jostling for position, what's a really big kind of move that either of these players can make to swing it in their direction?
Well, this was huge. This window that David has now given to Chris to get that stomp down means that Chris can, yes, that one, the 3-1 Brazen Borrower is gone, but so is the Luris, and now Chris can once again lead off. He can play that Brazen Borrower at instant speed if he wants. He can petty theft this Thieves Guild Enforcer if he wants, even though it's pretty unlikely that he'll want to do that. The only reason would be if David Inglis goes for this Soaring Thought Thief to try to put the last few cards in Chris's graveyard, then he may respond with Petty Theft to get the Thieves Guild Enforcer out of here. Otherwise, just the 3-1 attacker is exactly what you're looking for.
Back over to Chris now, finds Edgewall Innkeeper for the turn. Would have been nice to have that a bit earlier on when he had 5 or 6 adventure spells in hand.
Yeah, definitely not getting maximum value out of this Innkeeper anymore, but considering he may have just wanted Bonecrusher Giant to be his play this turn, not unhappy to see it. Now with this block, Chris may be tempted to go for the Ember Cleave here, and will unfortunately receive the bad news of this Drownloch waiting to counter and get the trade, and then David will have free reign to untap and draw 4 cards, and suddenly Chris's pain will be renewed.
Decides to actually go and kill off the Brazen Borrower, and it's story time here for David Inglis. Drawing 4, and wow, these are all bangers.
Yeah, this is just spelling out pain for Chris Botelho. Removing the creature is actually something that I love from David. Not taking the trade and understanding equipping Embercleave for 3 mana is a massive cost this Chris in his current position will likely not be able to afford to do. So instead he keeps his Soaring Thought Thief, and now he's getting very close to threatening lethal in 2 turns, and as soon as he untaps, he'll have 2 hard counters and or removal spells to do so. So Chris wants to play Elder Gargoth here, that's fine. Drownloch will take care of it, and suddenly the entire game is over for Chris Botelho.
Not really a lot that Chris can do here. Not working with many resources, no way to refill the hand in the way that David Inglis just managed to. And things looking very academic now for David. Drown in the Loch, ready to take care of that Gargaroth.
Yeah, Drownloch able to take care of the Gargaroth. David not going to get greedy and do anything like into the story for cards trying to find an untapped land. You want to just play this as safe as possible. We saw him doing the same thing last game, understanding his win condition, understanding his route to victory, and playing to that route. He's not deviating in any way, and I think this is just excellent play from David Inglis this entire match.
Goldspan Dragon off the top for Chris Botelho, but that's not even going to resolve, let alone help him swing the course of this game. Chris at a precarious 3 life has the option to go for a redraw with this Bonecrusher Giant.
Yeah, if he goes Bonecrusher Giant and draws a removal spell for the Soaring Thought Thief, which likely has to be a Petty Theft, if he manages to find that, there is a world where this Drownloch doesn't exist in David's hand, and maybe Chris can try to cobble together a comeback, but as it stands, he is dead on board and unable to do anything, so David Inglis will be taking this match.
Mystical Dispute, really not what Chris was looking for. I love to see this. Get that 1 damage in with the Edgewall Innkeeper. Send the message. Thieves Guild Enforcer. Really, just extra damage and kind of unnecessary here for David Inglis.
And David just trying to maximize the pain for Chris here, as letting him know that in case he thought this game was close, it wasn't.
I think Chris, full in the knowledge there, and you see the little chuckle there from Crispy. Always, the humorous one always has a smile on his face, even in defeat. And there we go, down to minus 1 billion life. David Inglis takes down round number 3 against Chris Botelho and advances to 3-0 here at the KHM Championships.
Yeah,
Wow,
really
Marty.
great stuff from David. Love to see it.